Hello everyone, what is going on? My name is Timpedia and welcome to part 2, aka the Star Wars part, of my birthday 2017, 26th birthday special video about my favorite books and series and such of all time. So, without further ado, let's get right into the Star Wars section of the show. Kicking it off with Star Wars is the book series that got me into Star Wars books in the first place. You guys can literally thank this series for being the reason I have spent as much time with Star Wars and the reason I got started with all the Star Wars videos on YouTube, the X-Wing series. I remember when I was a kid in middle school or early high school, and I was at a bookstore in the mall where my girlfriend is currently working, and I was walking through the bookstore and I just happened to see sitting on one of the shelves Star Wars books. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know Star Wars had books. And I pulled one out and it happened to be X-Wing number 2, Wedge's Gambit. And I don't know why, but I took it. And here we are now. To this day, I don't know if any Star Wars books do non-force-based combat and intrigue better than the X-Wing series does. The Back to War is probably my favorite Star Wars book of all time, mostly because it's basically an RTS game. I always wish that I could build up... I mean, in every Star Wars game, I wish I could build up a small force like that into like a few X-Wings, and then, oh, we got a base. Oh, we found an Alderaanian war frigate. And even if it feels silly, it's still so awesome in my mind, and I just love it. Even the latest one, Mercy Kill, that came out much later, which was just not fantastic, but okay. It didn't have a lot of the same characters, but they're all interesting. The rogues and wraiths are such fascinating casts of characters, and they're all just awesome. And it's probably my favorite series, but we'll keep going because there's plenty more good ones to come. Now, this series I've definitely talked about before too, because it was also in my top 10 Star Wars Expanded Universe pieces. The Bane Trilogy. I guess you could say it's the Darth Bane Trilogy. Darth Bane is one of the most fascinating Sith Lords because in so many stories about the Sith, there is always the struggle of apprentice versus master to see who is more powerful. The difference with the Bane books is that it's not about just power, it's about whose philosophy will dominate the Sith for a long time, the Brotherhood or Bane. It's about the struggle of a new idea almost. So it almost covers something so different that it's unique amongst not just Force users, but dark side Force users even, and stories about them, because the whole time you're not sure if Bane is correct. In the first book, he's trying to turn the Brotherhood into something different and basically ends up destroying it. And then in the later books, until Zana supplants him, or if she will, we don't know if Bane is correct, if Bane's philosophy for the Sith is correct. Now, we cheat because we're in the future, but at the time, it still grips you of whether or not he'll succeed. So, really, that story of Bane and Zana throughout the whole trilogy is the key thing that almost keeps the Sith interesting for a long time, and really adds a lot of weight to the series, along with it being about the dark side. But it's not just about fighting the Jedi. They happen to show up in all three books, but they are never the focus. They are never the primary antagonist. Just as often, Bane and Zana are working against each other, or Bane works against himself with the Orbalisk. So there's just lots of layers, and it's awesome to look at the dark side from such a new perspective. In a similar thread to the Darth Bane books, we have a standalone book, Darth Plagueis, which I think is one of the unfortunate losses due to the expanded universe dying so soon after, because this book was fantastic and immeasurably better than anything else ever could, really, in my mind. Set the stage for the whole Plagueis versus Sidious showdown / apprenticeship and everything. Like how Plagueis goes from just having from having his own master die all the way up to being killed by Sidious is a fascinating journey about how they constructed, because the whole time you're watching the prequel trilogy, it's just, oh, here's like 5 bits of info about how this whole war started. But there's no real sense of the details or how long it took to make the Clone Wars happen. Plagueis and Sidious are plotting for like 20 plus years, turning the galaxy slowly and slowly and slowly towards this goal. And it's just a masterful take on the intrigue it took them to get from one place to the other. So really, this journey not only defines how like the biggest change in the history of the galaxy, you could argue, happens, but also where Palpatine, one of the greatest Sith ever, really comes from and how he comes into his own. So it's certainly one of the best treatises on the dark side out there, along with the Bane trilogy. Switching back over to the light side for a little while, this is kind of an unofficial series. They're tied together, but they aren't part of the same named series. It's the MedStar duology from the Clone Wars and the Coruscant Nights, I guess you could call it quadrilogy. The fact that a few of the characters carry over between the two series and a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same writing style carries over. It's awesome to see this it's kind of the ragtag group. It's kind of like what Rogue One became, but it's much lower scale. There's never as much weight on them as there is. There's just this war for this super minor drug. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but like fighting for this minor drug on this one planet in the MedStar duology, and I can't remember the Jedi's name. Barriss, and her character development as a Jedi as she experiments with drugs, basically. Like, when have you ever read a story where Jedi did drugs? And then, God, I can't remember his name again. I'm sorry. The Jedi on Coruscant in the Coruscant Nights trilogy, as he's underground trying to help the nascent rebels on Coruscant, at the same time hiding from Vader and coming across him, and Vader doing drugs almost. Like, it's a pretty wild series, and I just love how it carried through across these eras, from a Jedi with these minor characters, the droid and the Sulstan, I can't remember their names again, going from those characters in the setting of the Clone Wars and that dirty, gritty war to going to something completely different, like this guerrilla warfare on Coruscant, is just such a difference between the two. And it's an awesome comparison while you have this baseline of the same characters. So I really love the MedStar duology. It's probably one of my favorite stories of Jedi, with Barriss and the other guy on Coruscant in the Coruscant Nights. Now we leave the Force behind and go for what many people probably would have expected would be the number one on any top 10 book official for Star Wars. Not counting just me personally. The Timothy Zahn series is specifically the Thrawn Trilogy and the Hand of Thrawn duology. I mean, what could you say about Thrawn that hasn't been said? He's really one of the greatest Star Wars villains there is, and there's a reason they unfortunately brought him back for Star Wars Rebels, which sounds kind of ridiculous. Not to rely on hearsay, but it sounds like Thrawn doesn't do fantastic things as of the current seasons. He seems to not be super threatening, so that's a little disappointing. But in the books, he was very threatening. His whole gimmick about finding about information about species from their artwork, and his sheer intelligence, like the New Republic, and you see it from the point of view of Paleon, the New Republic never puts one over on Thrawn. He just sees everything coming, and when in so many books, there's the situation where it's like, how could the bad guys have possibly known that? It's like you could almost get away with it with Thrawn, with the Katana fleet, when he just knows where the Katana fleet is and he gets there first. It's kind of like, okay, how'd you know that? But with Thrawn, you could actually believe that he could figure it out or find some other way. He projects this competent air that makes you totally believe that he actually could figure out a lot of the things, and it adds a lot more menace to him when he's a believable villain versus a lot of villains who are just kind of like, you're kind of just pulling stuff out of nowhere. That's ridiculous. I don't believe that you could do any of that. So it adds a lot more to Thrawn as a character, and him not even being there holds together the hand of Thrawn duology, where just the threat of Thrawn again sends the whole galaxy into a tizzy. So it really is one of the best Star Wars series out there, and that's me talking not just from a popularity standpoint. I would also like to mention here very quickly, referencing my other list, Timothy Zahn wrote a trilogy called the Black Collar Trilogy, which is set in an alternate Earth future timeline kind of sci-fi thing, but it's its own thing, and I happened to read it. And it is also very good. It's very different to be reading Timothy Zahn when it's not related to Star Wars, but his own trilogy is awesome. The whole Black Collar Trilogy, where it's basically humanity has lost a war against aliens, and now we are run by aliens, and there are tons and tons of humans who are basically collaborators through no fault of their own, because they're basically conditioned to be collaborators. And it's actually a fascinating series of basically how guerrillas can turn an entire war, and it kind of references, I guess what you could call it, referencing the Galactic Alliance, the Rebel Alliance on a galactic scale, where you see these low-level people who, like small squads of people who one small action can just turn the tide of a war. So anyway, that's enough about Timothy Zahn. Let's finish up a few more topics. For example, we have the single largest named series in the history of Star Wars, and one of the largest in books probably, the New Jedi Order. Very specifically, I'm calling out the Enemy Lines sub-duology, I guess you could call it. For me, this is mostly about my love of the X-Wing series. I love the low-level resistance kind of rebellion / more military than Jedi feel that Enemy Lines has. It's right after the fall of Coruscant, and it famously has the bit where the Lysankia sacrifices itself ramming into a world ship. It just all the technical combat stuff in that just blows my mind. I love those more combat than just Jedi fighting each other. You know, hand-to-hand combat is so hard to portray through books. So I always love the chances to see like how a space battle works when you kind of get a more grand picture of how things could work. Like you can almost see it on the table in front of you, and that's what I get out of Enemy Lines. But the whole NJO is obviously one of the biggest changes in the entire expanded universe, between Jason being captured and the fall of Coruscant and the Yuzhong Vong, who are one of the single scariest threats in the galaxy because, well, they're not from the galaxy. So it adds a whole new level of alienness to a universe that's built on being familiar yet not alien, if that makes any sense. The whole thing of Star Wars is that it's aliens, but it kind of still doesn't feel that much because we can travel so quickly. But the Yuzhong Vong do everything so completely differently that it just adds this whole new, different alien feel to everything throughout the series. So it's still like it's a whole new war. It's not just the Alliance versus the Galactic Empire again in some new form. No, this is a truly different war. All right, and finally, we have something of a contentious pick, I suppose, but this is one of the series that this is probably the first major Star Wars series that I was reading as it came out. Like I said, I started reading when Dark Nest Trilogy was coming out. Dark Nest wasn't fantastic, and I had so many other books to read at the time that I actually kind of didn't. I was too sucked into other things. But Legacy of the Force started coming out right when I was ready to start buying new Star Wars books on release. And man, oh man, like I'm looking at my shelves and I still have Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi in hardcover because I had to buy them new like that. And Legacy of the Force, is such a shake-up series. It's Legacy of the Force is the thing I think of when I think of how Episode 7 was very disappointing to me, Star Wars Episode 7. I think all I have to think about is how Jason fell to the dark side and how this whole war and him and Ben Skywalker, how all of these things are done so much better in Legacy of the Force. There are definitely problems with Legacy, but so much of it is just done so well that, and it's just such a fascinating idea that it makes it all worth it. Really, the conflict between Jason and Jaina and what it comes down to at the end, and how Jason does so much damage to the Jedi, but you feel the conflict in Han and Leia as they try to deal with what their son is doing, and how they even still try to love him, and how Jaina faces her sad duty as the sword of the Jedi. There's so much weight there, and which would unfortunately kind of be undone in Fate of the Jedi just because of the whole Abeloth thing. Fate of the Jedi is not on this list, but Legacy of the Force, I think, while not perfect, brings so much tension and weight to the table, and such a different take, because you're almost kind of rooting for Jason for a while there. Like, you can understand his motivations. And it's creepy to see the Galactic Alliance almost kind of become the Empire again. So that I really do enjoy a lot the Legacy of the Force series. And I think it's definitely one of the better sets of stories out there. For our final entry in this series, we actually have kind of a cheat. I've covered all the Star Wars novels that I loved, and I'm not even going to go into the comic books as I stare at the 25, 30 omnibuses I have on my shelves. But one of the things that made me love Star Wars so much is the essential guides. If you look up the Star Wars Essential Guides, there were 3 series of them, and I own every single one from Series 2 and Series 3. And those books, more than anything else, right when I was getting into Star Wars, after I'd started reading X-Wing and growing out from there, those books are what helped cemented Star Wars for me, because those books provided so much more information than I could get reading a bunch of books. It was like reading Spark Notes for the 50,000 types of droids and all the starships that were so cool, and the weapons and how a lightsaber worked, and then later on, like, all the warfare that's taken place in the galaxy and maps and everything. And it was just so much information, and it was so awesome. I don't love guidebooks. I don't have like video game Prima guides or anything like that, but I love the Star Wars Essential Guides, specifically the Series 2 and Series 3, because after Series 3 they stopped. And Series 1 basically all got rewritten for Series 2. There was like droids, characters, and something else, and then they all got new additions. Yeah, vehicles and vessels, weapons, droids, and characters, I think, was Series 1, and then Series 2 just redid all those, and then Series 3 was like the Essential Guide to the Force and the Essential Guide to Warfare, and just so much awesome information, and in such an awesome format. So many pictures in my mind of what ships and weapons and characters look like comes from that book. I hadn't read up to where Mara Jade was until I saw that book. And I was like, oh my God, she's so amazing. And I was like, she's so cool. Look at that awesome red hair. And so many mental pictures of mine are tied to those books. So almost as much as any novel, those books mean a ton to me. So with that, I'm going to call this video to a close. Thank you so much for watching these as my little celebration for you guys of my 26th birthday, showing off the books that have helped get me where I am today. So leave any comments below about what you like, or go watch the part 1 if you missed it. Either way, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.